In today's society, everyone knows everything about each other. With our modern day obsession with sharing every single detail about ourselves on social media, there's no more mystery. Everyone has to share what they're doing every day, what they ate, what brand of floss they use, if they took a shit or not. But some of us like to be mysterious. Mysterious and
enigmatic. Oh, wait. Oh man, what happened to my mysterious enigmatic persona? Now I'm just back to being regular schmuck me? Well, I'm Dantavius, how you doing? And just in case you were wondering, I did take a massive dump today. You're welcome for that information. Anyways, I've always been fascinated with like weird people throughout history like Nikola Tesla and Rasputin, so I decided, hey, why don't I do an iceberg video on it? If you're unfamiliar with what an iceberg is, welcome to YouTube. It's a way of sorting information from least known to most known. That's all you need to know, man. Let's get this intro over with, shall we? Oh, one thing before I begin. If you enjoy this video, consider possibly giving me a like, giving me a sub. You know, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but hey, don't do that now. Wait until you're done watching the video, then you can decide, because I don't want to, you know, pressure you into anything. But okay, let's actually start now. The Babushka lady was a woman who was present during the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Her nickname comes from the fact that she resembles a babushka, or an old Russian woman who wears a headscarf. She appeared in many of the photos taken during the Kennedy assassination, and in one of these pictures, she appears to be holding a camera. Now, the weird thing about this woman is that most of the people who witnessed Kennedy's assassination were brought in for questioning to see if they saw who the culprit was. But the Babushka lady was never officially identified, which is suspicious, because if she was indeed holding a camera and caught something, wouldn't she want the world to know? That's where the conspiracies come in. Some people believe she was taken care of because she caught something on camera that wasn't consistent with the original report that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. Yasuke. Before we get into this guy, let's do a little history lesson. In the 1500s, the Portuguese arrived in Japan. They had a pretty big influence on the country, and soon after arriving, they began converting the natives to Catholicism. The main group doing this were known as Jesuits, and in 1579, a Jesuit named Alessandro Valignano landed in Japan, accompanied by a slave who would later be called Yasuke. A Japanese feudal lord named Oda Nobunaga took a liking to Yasuke and brought him into his service as a soldier. Yasuke was about 6'2", so Nobunaga probably saw him and said, yo, I need that mother sucker on my team right now, because everyone else around me is like 5'5" on average. It didn't take long for Yasuke to move up the ladder and eventually reach the rank of samurai, but unfortunately soon after he became a samurai, Nobunaga, his lord, was attacked and forced to commit seppuku. Nobody knows what happened to Yasuke after that. But hey man, that's pretty freaking cool. Black Samurai? Oh, also there's an anime about this guy on Netflix if any of you guys are interested. Pretty sure it's not historically accurate, but Grigori Rasputin, who hasn't heard of this guy? He has a whole song and multiple movies about him. Rasputin was a Russian mystic who lived in the early 20th century and somehow finagled his way into the good graces of the Russian royal family. Rasputin was an illiterate peasant who apparently knew magic. Not much is known about his early life other than he was married at the age of 18 and had 4 children, who he left behind to go on a pilgrimage. During this pilgrimage to a monastery, he had a religious reawakening and became a preacher. It was said during this time he joined the Klists, which was a religious sect that participated in self-harm and orgies, among other things. Rasputin also had a reputation for having hoes in different area codes. Like, this man was absolutely slanging, allegedly. We don't know how much of that is true and how much of it was pro-imperial Russian propaganda. Anyways, Rasputin began to build a following and had a reputation of being a healer and wise man. Eventually, he made his way to St. Petersburg, where he met Emperor Nicholas and Empress Alexandra. He was brought into the royal palace as a healer for the emperor's son Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. And the crazy thing is, he actually made the son better. Now, while he was at court, the emperor went off to fight in World War I, and during this time, he had a large amount of influence over Empress Alexandra. A lot of the other nobles didn't like this, so they decided to whack him. Now, the circumstances of his death are absolutely nutty. Apparently, he ate a whole meal laced with enough cyanide to take down your mom. Then he was shot in the chest, and of course he survived that, but then he was shot in the head where he finally died, because, let's be honest, shot in the head, hard to come back from. Tank Man. In 1989, a student-led protest took place in an area of Beijing known as Tiananmen Square. These protests called for free speech, free press, and an end to the one-party system. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with China at all, but they don't like that shit too much. After a few weeks of protests, the Chinese Communist Party instated martial law. The army then began to fire on anyone who continued to protest. Hundreds of protesters as well as innocent bystanders were killed. This would come to be known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre. The following day, a man carrying groceries stood in front of a line of tanks headed to Beijing, presumably to commit more acts of violence. He then climbed on top of a tank and spoke to the soldiers inside before he was carried off by some random people. I gotta say, this guy has some tremendous balls. Like, this guy has balls spelled B-A-W-L-Z, bro. Now, nobody knows what happened to this man, if he was killed, imprisoned, or just went on living a normal life, but I somehow doubt the last option. D.B. Cooper. It's November 24th, 1971. A middle-aged man in a business suit carrying a black leather briefcase hops on a one-way flight from Portland to Seattle. He orders a bourbon and soda, and after he finishes it, he calls the flight attendant over and hands her a note. She's probably thinking, oh great, another frickin' schmuck trying to join the Mile High Club. But just as she finished her thought, he leans in and whispers to her,
"You might want to take a look at that note. I have a bomb."
The note instructs her to sit beside Cooper, and she does. He then opens the briefcase and shows her the bomb. She shits her pants, and then he tells her his demands. $200,000 cash and 4 parachutes. None of the passengers were informed of what was going on, and when the plane landed, the FBI gave Cooper his money and parachutes. He then demanded that the pilot fly him to Mexico City, which he did, but about 30 minutes into the flight, Cooper jumped out of the plane, never to be seen again. This is truly the most devious lick in history. Buckethead is a guitarist who performs with a Mike Myers mask and a KFC bucket on his head. If you're not into rock music, you've probably never heard of this guy, but make no mistake, this man is an absolute legend. He has over 300 albums, bro. 300! And he's performed with a ton of popular musicians and was even a member of Guns N' Roses for 4 years. Now, since he performs Daft Punk style, hiding his face and identity, almost nothing is known about him until 2017, of course, where he did a podcast out of character talking about his life. Technoviking. This is a viral video from the 2000 Fuck Parade in Berlin. Fuck Parade was an annual summer techno music event that also denounced mainstream pop culture. Now, at this particular event, you see a guy shoving a blue-haired woman before being grabbed and presumably given a stern talking to by some Thor-looking motherfucker. The man, known as Technoviking, then walks down the street where he's weirdly handed an upside-down water bottle by some other dude before he proceeds to dance like an absolute madman. This video went absolutely viral back in 2006 when it was uploaded to YouTube, currently sitting at 23 million views. The actual Technoviking sued the guy who filmed this video because he didn't want his likeness to be public, and he won. The cameraman was ordered by a judge to pay 13,000 euros in damages. You know, in a society where everyone's addicted to clout and would sell their nipples for 5 minutes as fame, it's kind of interesting and also admirable that this guy didn't just come out and say, "Hey, that is me, I am the Technoviking," and start making merch and all this other bullshit. So, you know, shout out to him. Aleister Crowley, known as the wickedest man in the world. Aleister Crowley was an English occultist, magician, poet, painter, and just all-around creepy guy. He attended Cambridge University in 1895, where he engaged in all sorts of degenerate behavior, including smoking, whacking off, and lying with streetwalkers. After a few years, he gave up on university and joined the Golden Dawn, a secret society known for occult rituals and black magic shit. He was very unpopular in this group, being described by the other members as weird and smelly. I might have paraphrased that a little bit, but you get the idea. Oh, he also claimed to have been a Freemason. Anyways, after a failed takeover of the Golden Dawn, Crowley started traveling the world and eventually arrived in Egypt. While there, he claimed that Egyptian gods spoke to him and told him he would be their prophet. It was at this point that Crowley created his very own cult known as Thelema. During World War I, Crowley wrote pro-German propaganda in order to try and keep the United States from getting involved in the war. I don't know why though, I mean, it doesn't really explain his motives or anything. But this made him very unpopular in England, so he couldn't go back, like he was banned from England. Instead, he went to France and set up his cult headquarters in an abandoned building where he started to gain many followers. During his time in Thelema Abbey, as he called it, he continued to engage in even more depraved behavior that I'm not even gonna mention because I like being monetized. Apparently, Thelema is still practiced by a small amount of people today, and Aleister Crowley was so infamous back in the day that he was featured on the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. hand. Zodiac Killer was a serial killer active in Northern California in the late 1960s. He's confirmed to have whacked 5 people, but claims that the actual number is 37. Many cold cases were also attributed to him. He was known for sending taunting letters to local newspapers, which were often coded and had to be deciphered. In the first letter he sent, he claimed he was collecting souls for the afterlife. This is the only known sketch of the man who was described by one of the victims who survived. Finding the true identity of the Zodiac was made even harder by numerous copycat killers and other random people sending letters to newspapers claiming to be him. Now, this mother sucker never got caught, so he's potentially still out there. Like, he could be a senator in Texas for all we know. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer active in London in 1888. He was known to target ladies of the night who worked in the slums of London's East End. Now, multiple ladies of the night were whacked within quick succession of each other, and during this time, multiple letters were sent to news outlets claiming to be the killer. One in particular was signed as Jack the Ripper, but that's now thought to be a hoax, but somehow the name stuck because, you know, it's catchy. There are 5 total whackings that are all but confirmed to be connected to one guy, and 6 more that are not 100%, but they're still pretty sure. While he was active, London went to an absolute panic. People were afraid to go outside, and a committee was formed to patrol the streets at night to try to catch the maniac. He was never caught though. The Man in the Iron Mask. You may have heard of him from the not-so-good movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. He was a prisoner who was arrested in France in 1670 and was held in multiple French prisons for 34 years. The prisoner was never identified because of a velvet face mask covering his face. It actually wasn't iron, but the man in the velvet mask sounds kind of stupid. Now, nobody knows who this guy was, but it's generally speculated that he was an important person. Otherwise, the French would have just cut his head off, because you know how much they love doing that. Some of the theories of his identity include a relative of the King of France, an important French general, an Italian diplomat, and even the King of England's son, but it's still not known for sure. Spring-Heeled Jack. I talked about this fella on my Cryptids Iceberg, so I'm just gonna play a clip from that because I'm a lazy sack of shit. Spring-Heeled Jack is a humanoid cryptid in English folklore who was apparently amazing at gymnastics. Jack was popping off in 1800s London, with the first sighting of him being recorded in 1837 by a man who claims the mysterious figure jumped over a high railing and landed right in front of him before running off. The most well-known incidents involving Jack were the attacks of 2 teenage girls, Lucy Scales and Jane Alsop. These attacks were widely reported in British newspapers and helped bring Spring-Heeled Jack into popular culture. There were many more sightings of Jack throughout the 19th century, all the way up to 1904, where the last recorded sighting of him happened. Berserker of Stamford Bridge. In 1066, the King of England, Harold Godwinson, was awaiting an invasion from the Normans of France led by William the Bastard. But to his surprise, as he was waiting for William, the Viking King of Norway invaded northern England along with Harold's brother Toasted Godwinson. Now, the Norwegians were not expecting any resistance because they thought Harold was preoccupied in the south, but they were wrong. That motherfucker went straight up north, and they got absolutely wrecked by the English. The Norwegian Vikings were pushed back to Stamford Bridge. Now, the English tried to cross the bridge, probably to get to the other side, but they were being held off by one guy with a huge axe. An unnamed Viking berserker is said to have whacked 40 of Harold's men before getting skewered with a spear. Eventually, the British did cross the bridge and wipe out the Vikings, but it took a lot longer than it should have, just because this one mother sucker with balls of brass. Anyways, this little detour ensured the Norman conquest of England, and the Norman king went from being William the Bastard to William the Conqueror. Now that's a glow up if I've ever heard one. Fulcanelli sounds like a fucking pasta dish, but it's not. Fulcanelli was an alchemist and author in the early 20th century. Nobody knows this guy's real identity, but apparently he had students who he taught the craft of alchemy. One of these students, named Eugene Concellier, apparently turned lead into gold. Somehow this claim isn't confirmed, which is weird because you'd think that was a pretty sick party trick. Agent 355 was the codename of a female spy active during the American Revolution. She was a member of a secret spy ring known as Culper Ring. Many people believe that it was actually 355 who discovered Benedict Arnold was a traitor, but unfortunately not much else is known about her. John Titor, aka Time Traveler _0, was the name of an alleged time traveler from the year 2036. He was active on multiple online forums from 2000 to 2001. During this time he claimed to be a soldier that traveled back in time to visit his family. He described in detail the time machine that he used and made many predictions of what would happen in the future. For example, he said that there would be a large amount of civil unrest starting in 2005 due to the 2005 presidential election. This unrest would continue for years until an all-out civil war would break out in 2008 and wouldn't end until 2015. As a result of this war, the United States would splinter into 5 different countries. Immediately after the Civil War, World War III would break out when the Russians nuked Jacksonville and Washington, D.C. After this, Omaha, Nebraska would be the new U.S. capital. Now, this is the point where I knew this guy was full of shit, because there ain't no reality where Omaha, Nebraska is the capital of the United States. Come on, man. This guy's worse at predictions than Stephen A. Smith. William Shakespeare. You know him, you love him, you were forced to read his books in high school. Bill Shakespeare put out some absolute bangers back in the day, bro. Romeo and Juliet, Othello, King Lear, Graduation. Oh wait, no, that last one was Kanye West, never mind. This guy had such a massive impact on literature and the English language in general. In fact, this man invented 300 words that we still use today. He invented the word alligator, bro. I rest my case. Now, there's a lot of mystery surrounding Shakespeare's life. Historians aren't 100% sure of most of the details of his life. They don't even know his exact date of birth. And from 1585 to 1592, he's completely missing from the history books. This was called the Shakespeare Dark Age. No one knows what he was doing during this period. Many people think this was on purpose because Shakespeare was a Catholic sympathizer, which was a big no-no in England at the time. So he had to lay as low as possible. The Green Children of Woolpit. In the 12th century, 2 children appeared in the village of Woolpit, England. They looked normal, except for their green skin. They spoke an unknown language and only ate fava beans. Gross. The town took care of them and they eventually learned to eat other foods. The boy unfortunately passed away, but the girl lived and was baptized. Eventually the girl learned English and stated she was from a place called St. Martin's Land, which was an underground world inhabited by green people. Now, I know this story's fake because they didn't immediately burn these kids at the stake, which was pretty much the policy at the time if anything was slightly weird about somebody. Like, oh, you wash your ass, you must be a witch, we're burning you at the stake. You use deodorant, burn at the stake. Bro, you can read? Stake. Satoshi Nakamoto. He's the elusive creator of Bitcoin. You know that thing you wish you bought 10 years ago when your friend Mike told you about it, but you brushed it off as another bullshit fad, and now Mike lives in a mansion and owns a yacht, and you're still sitting in your room eating ramen and watching Iceberg videos on YouTube? But yeah, anyways, nobody knows who the real creator of Bitcoin is, or if it's just one guy or a group of people. There's a ton of speculation, and I've even heard some people say that Vladimir Putin or the Chinese government commissioned the creation of Bitcoin. Kaspar Hauser was a German teenager who claimed to have spent his entire youth locked inside of a dungeon. What is it with Germans and dungeons, man? Anyways, he turned up one day in Nuremberg with a letter addressed to a Captain von Wessenig. The letter stated that the boy was given into the custody of an unknown man who taught him how to read and write, but never let him out of the house. The boy seemed to be intellectually impaired and was immediately imprisoned for being a vagabond, aka a homeless person. I'm sorry, but can you imagine spending your entire life in a cell, being let out, and immediately being put back into a cell? He was eventually let out and put under the care of a few different people. All of his caretakers claimed that he was a compulsive liar and a charlatan. In 1832, Hauser came home with a stab wound in his chest. Apparently, a stranger stabbed him and handed him a note. Hauser would later pass away from the injury. Now, the thing is, Hauser had been in multiple similar scenarios where he was attacked and injured by random people with no other witnesses. There are 2 theories as to why. One, he was part of a noble family who was imprisoned as a child to keep him from challenging the throne. Or 2, he made all that shit up and he stabbed himself for attention, but it was too deep and he ended up whacking himself. The Axeman of New Orleans was a serial killer active in 1918 and 1919 who mainly targeted Italians. Oh, us Italians can never get a fucking break. His main weapon was an axe, hence the name the Axeman of New Orleans. Now, I don't know if this guy was an actual serial killer or just a member of the mafia, because, fun fact, the American mafia actually originated in New Orleans in the late 1860s, so perhaps this guy was whacking people for business reasons. Who knows? The man from Torrid. So in 1959, a man named John Zagreus arrived at customs in Japan with his wife. He presented his passport to the clerk, and it was the size of a magazine and had stamps on it from many East Asian countries. The weird thing about his passport, other than the fact that that it was massive is that it was written in an unknown language. The man claimed to be from a country south of Ethiopia named Taurid. Other accounts say that the country is named Negusi Habesi. He also claimed to be both an intelligence officer working for the US as well as an ambassador for his own country. He was arrested and sentenced to 1 year in prison in Japan for forgery. Oh, and I forgot to mention, he also tried to cash a bunch of counterfeit checks. The tale of the man from Taurid has created a lot of speculations about parallel universes and parallel dimensions. Like, this guy could be from another dimension where this country is a real place. El Dorado. You may know El Dorado as the mythical South American city that's made entirely of gold from the DreamWorks movie. Or maybe you just remember this chick from that movie. Either way, El Dorado was originally a tale about a tribal chief in Colombia who covered himself in gold dust. I don't know how it later became a city, but whatever. John Doe 24, not to be confused with John Doe 23, is the name given to a teenager found by 2 police officers in 1945 while wandering the streets of Jacksonville, Illinois. The boy was deaf and only knew how to write one word, Lewis, which was presumed to be his name. Now, the kid was an anomaly. Nobody could find out any information about him, who his parents were, where he came from, even what his real name was. I mean, probably Lewis though, right? Anyways, his name was legally changed to John Doe Boyd. Really? They couldn't incorporate Lewis in there in any way? It couldn't be John Doe Lewis? Where are you getting Boyd from? Anyways, he spent the remainder of his life in various Illinois mental health institutions. The Mad Gasser of Mattoon. So in Mattoon, Illinois, 1944, there was a series of incidents involving gas. And no, this was not Taco Bell related because Taco Bell wasn't invented yet. Multiple residents in the area claimed to have smelled a strange odor in their homes before experiencing weird symptoms, including coughing, vomiting, and even paralysis. During one of these incidents, a man was spotted outside the home of one of the victims of the gas attacks. He was chased by the victim's husband, but never caught. It was speculated that the gasser was using this gas to paralyze his victims so he could rob their houses. More and more reports of these gas attacks kept coming in, and it got to the point where the FBI had to get involved. Now, the weird thing about this whole event is that the FBI claimed it was a case of mass hysteria, since there was zero evidence of any toxic gases being released anywhere. But most of the victims were women, and back in those days, a woman could get stabbed and they would say it was all in her head. Man in the Hole. Man in the Hole is an indigenous Brazilian tribesman who lives in the Amazon rainforest. And when I say tribesman, I'm talking hunter-gatherer, loincloth, no shirt. He's assumed to be the last surviving member of his tribe. The language he speaks and the name of his tribe is unknown. The rest of his tribe was probably wiped out by loggers and ranchers. It's actually really sad. This dude's basically the last survivor of a genocide. Anyways, the name Man in the Hole comes from the deep holes he digs next to his homes. He'll build a home with the hole, he'll abandon it, and then move on and build another one. The government of Brazil has declared the territory he's known to inhabit off limits. Nobody can go in there and disturb him. Count Saint-Germain was a European traveler, musician, linguist, scholar, comedian, and alchemist. The mysterious part about this character is that nobody knows what is true about him and what was false, because he made up all these crazy stories about his life. For example, he claimed to be 500 years old. Even though nobody knew the truth behind his background, it was obvious that he was very wealthy and highly educated. He frequently hung out with royalty and even high-profile celebrities at the time like Voltaire, Casanova, and Horace Walpole, whoever the fuck that is. Now here's a list of his possible origins. Transylvanian priest, German Jew, Spanish Jesuit, the son of an Italian princess and a tax collector, and the list goes on. You can think of him as an 18th century version of the Great Gatsby. Gil Perez. In 1593, a Spanish soldier named Gil Perez claimed to have been mysteriously transported from the Philippines to Mexico City in the blink of an eye. He claimed that the Spanish governor of the Philippines was killed by Chinese pirates, and he was working as a guard in Manila for the government's replacement, when all of a sudden he passed out. When he opened his eyes again, all of a sudden he was in Mexico City. Obviously, nobody believed this story and he was arrested for deserting the army. But a few months later, a ship came bearing news that the governor actually was assassinated, and one of the people on the ship claimed that he saw Perez in the Philippines the day after the governor's assassination. Now, my personal theory? It was aliens, green boots. Every year, about 800 people attempt to climb to the top of Mount Everest. Some of them don't make it back. As a matter of fact, Mount Everest is home to about 300 bodies. Man, that's almost as many bodies as your mom. The most famous body on Everest is called Green Boots. The area in which the body is one of the stops you get to before reaching the peak. About 80% of climbers pass by Green Boots on the way to the top. So who is this guy? Well, in 1996, 8 climbers passed away in a massive blizzard. Green Boots was one of these climbers, although it's not exactly sure which one he was. Monsieur Chukani was a Jewish teacher who taught some very high-profile students, including French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas and Nobel Prize-winning author Elie Wiesel. This guy was so mysterious that his gravestone reads, "The wise Rabbi Chukani, blessed memory. His birth and his life are sealed in enigma." Nothing is known about this guy. His real name, where he was born, whether he was an Xbox or PlayStation guy, nothing. The Poe Toaster. Every year on January 19th, the birthday of Edgar Allan Poe, a man visits Poe's grave in the middle of the night and leaves a bottle of cognac and 3 roses before mysteriously disappearing. The man is said to wear all black with a wide-brimmed hat and a white scarf. Sometimes he would even leave notes like, "Edgar, I haven't forgotten you." Every year people would gather around to witness the tradition from afar. Despite this, I could only find one picture of the guy from who knows when. The tradition goes all the way back to 1930 allegedly and stopped in 2009 after the 200th anniversary of Poe's birthday. Shanti Devi was an Indian woman who claims to have remembered her previous life. She claims that in a past life her name was Lugdi Devi and she lived in the city of Mathura with her merchant husband, and that her previous self passed away after giving birth to a son. At the age of 6, she found her past self's husband, and the guy was convinced this was his reincarnated wife. The story got so big that Mahatma Gandhi himself set up a commission to investigate the claims. After questioning her and taking her to the hometown of her previous self, the commission concluded that Shanti Devi was in fact the reincarnation of Lugdi Devi. The Somerton Man. In 1948, the body of a man washed up on Somerton Beach in Australia. The man could not be identified, and the only clue that was found on him was a scrap of paper torn from a book titled Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The note read "Tamam shud," a Persian phrase which means it's over or it's finished. Now, the man has never been identified, and the autopsy couldn't even find a conclusive cause to his death. It was speculated that he was a spy and he was assassinated, since this was during the height of the Cold War. The Countess Desmond was a noblewoman from Ireland. She was nicknamed the Old Countess Desmond because, well, she was fucking old. No one's sure of her exact age when she died, but it's thought that she was anywhere between 90 and 140. Now, back in those days, it was impressive not to die of diarrhea before your 20th birthday, so living to 90 back then was almost unheard of. Bodhidharma, I probably did not say that right, but whatever, let's just move on, was a Buddhist monk credited with spreading Buddhism to East Asia. According to Chinese legend, he's also the one who basically created Kung Fu at the Shaolin Temple. Despite him being incredibly influential in China, not much is known about him. It's said that he came from the Western land, so he was probably Persian or Indian, because let's face it, not a lot of East Asians can grow a beard like that. Also, it's not even 100% clear when he arrived in China. This guy is shrouded in mystery and enigma. Akhenaten refers to an ancient Egyptian pharaoh whose existence was unknown until pretty recently. He was probably the father of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, aka King Tut, but Mari wasn't around back then, so it's not confirmed. Now, the interesting thing about Akhenaten is he unsuccessfully tried to start his own religion. That's right, Akhenaten left Egypt's polytheistic religion and founded his own religion known as Atenism, which worshipped the god Aten. This was significant because this was one of the first monotheistic religions ever. He also moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to a brand new city which he built named Akhetaten. Now, Akhenaten was apparently not a popular guy because after his death, Egypt went right back to their old religion and moved the capital back to Thebes. Future pharaohs would also destroy all of his statues and monuments and basically erase him from the history books. The only reason we even know about him at all is because archaeologists discovered his tomb in 1891. Wolf Messing was a self-proclaimed psychic and telepath. Now, you may be thinking, that's weird, but the weirdest thing about this guy, he was Polish. Oh what, you thought I was gonna go a whole video without making a Polish joke? Come on! It was said that he could read minds and manipulate them. He could even predict the future, apparently. His psychic abilities developed early on in life, and in his teen years, he was performing for the circus in Germany. During this time, he made a name for himself. In fact, he was so famous that Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud visited him in Vienna to inquire about his gifts. Apparently, he blew their socks off during the meeting on some David Blaine shit. Allegedly, during the meeting, Freud gave Messing a mental command to pluck 3 hairs from Einstein's mustache, and Messing carried out the command perfectly with no words needing to be spoken. And those aren't the only celebrities that were interested in his gifts. Apparently Mahatma Gandhi, Marilyn Monroe, and even Joseph Stalin sought him out. But more on that later. Wolf was in Poland when the Nazis invaded, and he made a public prediction that if Hitler made his way east, it would surely mean his death. Did you really need to be a psychic to predict that shit? I'm pretty sure if you have a basic understanding of history. Anyways, this prediction really pissed off Hitler, and it didn't help that Wolf was a Jew. Messing was in Poland during the Nazi invasion, and he was captured by 2 soldiers, but allegedly used his powers to escape. He then ran away to the Soviet Union, where Joseph Stalin himself requested that he be brought to the Kremlin. Stalin was curious of the legendary tales and tested Messing's skills. He gave him a mental order to rob a bank, so Messing headed over to the bank and, using the power of suggestion, mind-controlled the teller into giving him a check for 10,000 rubles. Actually, sorry, 100,000 rubles. That's even more impressive. Anyway, Stalin was amazed, but unfortunately the bank teller was probably sent to a gulag. Edward Keeley was an English occultist and alleged spirit medium, meaning he could speak to the dead. And big surprise, he was also an alchemist. How come every weird motherfucker back then was into alchemy, bro? It was like the anime of its day or something. He was known for his relationship with John Dee, another occultist slash alchemist who also happened to be Queen Elizabeth's court astronomer and advisor. Dee discovered Keeley when he was looking for somebody that could speak to angels, which Keeley apparently could do with the use of a crystal ball. Edward Keeley spent most of his life traveling around Europe, going to different noble houses where he would provide his services as a medium. Also, I think I should probably mention that Keeley was a known charlatan who was arrested for forgery and counterfeiting. Sidney Gottlieb was a chemist who worked for the CIA. Gottlieb was behind most of the assassination attempts carried out by the CIA in the 50s and 60s. He was also in charge of the government's mind control program known as MK Ultra. Now, if you're not familiar with MK Ultra, I'm not going to get too far into it here, but basically, during the height of the Cold War in the 50s, the US government was incredibly paranoid that the Soviet Union and China were going to take over the world. So to prevent that, they needed every advantage they could get. In the CIA, it was believed that the Soviets had already figured out how to mind control people, so they needed to catch up. That's why they decided to launch Project Artichoke, which was the precursor to MK Ultra. Gottlieb was brought in as the lead researcher, and the main goal of the project was to determine if somebody could be involuntarily made to perform an assassination or any other action for that matter. The secondary goal was finding new interrogation techniques. At this time, they were forcing people to take all sorts of drugs, including cocaine, peyote, mescaline, heroin, and LSD. Sounds like a good time. How do I sign up for that trial? Gottlieb eventually tried LSD himself to test its efficacy. After about 7 hours of watching ancient aliens and tripping balls, he decided this was the way to go. He then started Project MK Ultra with the goal to create a truth serum and to control people's minds. The studies mainly focused on LSD. Apart from MK Ultra, Gottlieb was also behind a bunch of goofy failed assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. Some of these schemes included an exploding conch shell, an exploding cigar, a poisoned pencil, a poisoned wetsuit, and all sorts of other wacky things. Sidney retired from the CIA in 1973, stating that he didn't believe his work there had been effective, or at least that's what he wants you to think. The unknown woman is Sine. I don't know how to pronounce anything, man, so you guys are gonna have to get used to this. She was a woman whose face would be hanging on the walls of many artists in the early 1900s. Obviously, not her real face, but like a mask of her face. She was known as the drowned Mona Lisa because it was said that the woman whose face it belonged to was discovered drowned in a river, and the coroner was so infatuated with her beauty that he decided to make a mask out of her face. The mask was so popular that it was actually used as the model for the very first CPR dolls, and they're still in use today. That's why she's known as the most kissed face of all time. Ching Yuen was a Chinese herbalist and martial artist who was known for his incredibly long life. Yen claimed to have been born in 1736 and he passed away in 1933. According to my calculations, that's carry the 3, a long fucking time. He also apparently joined the army at the age of 72. Yen attributed his longevity to subscribing to Dantavius' YouTube channel. That's weird, man. We should probably test that theory out. Aristias was a Greek poet who was active in 700 BC. Apparently when he died, his body went missing and he turned up 240 years later in Rome and commanded that a statue be built of himself. There's not really a lot of information on this guy, but I don't know, man. Who knows if he even existed? The Max Headroom Incident guy. Max Headroom was a fictional character who premiered on British television in 1985. The fictional backstory of this character is that he was the world's first artificial intelligence talk show host. He got pretty popular in the 80s, at one point even appearing on David Letterman, but he's probably most famous for the Max Headroom Incident. In 1987, an unidentified man wearing a Max Headroom mask hijacked 2 separate television broadcasts in Chicago. Despite multiple investigations and a lot of speculation, the hijacker was never caught. Dread Pirate Roberts. Now, when you hear that name, you probably think, hey, that's the guy from The Princess Bride. Well, yes, but it's also a real guy. A real guy named Ross Ulbricht, who ran a website known as the Silk Road. If you're unfamiliar with the Silk Road, it was a dark web market where people could buy and sell all sorts of illegal things. Drugs, guns, fake IDs, bootleg Doctor Who DVDs, you name it. The Silk Road ran through Tor, which is a software that redirects your IP address so it can't easily be tracked. And the transactions themselves were carried out using Bitcoin because that leaves no paper trail. So for all you people saying Bitcoin is useless, I bet you feel pretty stupid right now, don't you, huh? Yeah, let's see you try to buy illegal Doctor Who bootlegs with cash. Go ahead and try. See how far you get. Anyways, despite everything Ulbricht built, he was not very smart, and he left a lot of crumbs that helped the government track him down. After only 2 years of operating the Silk Road, he was convicted on charges of money laundering and conspiracy to commit computer hacking. For these charges, he received a double life sentence plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. And worst of all, the prison they sent him to was in Tucson. Now, Ulbricht was also linked to attempting to hire hitmen to whack people who threatened to reveal his identity. This was never confirmed though. Also, I feel I should mention he could have taken a plea deal to get just 10 years in prison, but he decided that he could win the case. Again, not very smart. Bella Kiss was not an adult film actress, but he was actually a Hungarian serial killer who whacked at least 24 people, mostly young women, and attempted to pickle their bodies. In 1914, he was drafted into World War I and left his house behind. During this time, the Hungarian army was experiencing gasoline shortages. Kiss's landlord recalled that he had several huge metal drums in his backyard, which Kiss claimed were filled with gasoline. So the landlord led soldiers to these barrels to confiscate them for the war effort. But when they opened them up, they noticed a horrible smell, and to their shock, there was bodies inside. Upon searching his house, they found 24 bodies total. He mostly targeted middle-aged women with no families who were looking for marriage. Upon further investigation, police noticed that all of the bodies had 2 puncture marks on their necks and were completely drained of blood. This led to speculation that Kiss was practicing vampirism. Man, this shit just gets weirder and weirder. After the discovery of the bodies, police immediately sent word to the army to find and arrest Kiss if he was still alive. Eventually, they found out that he was recovering from an injury in a Serbian hospital, but by the time the detective arrived to arrest him, he was already gone. After his disappearance, there were multiple alleged sightings, but he was never caught. Prahlad Jani was an Indian monk who claimed to have gone 50 years without eating or drinking. According to him, he didn't eat any food or drink any water from 1940 all the way up to his passing away in 2020. In the early 2000s, Johnny was studied by doctors multiple times. In the first study, he was observed for 10 days, and doctors claimed that he didn't poo-poo or pee-pee. Their words, not mine. They also noticed that his weight dropped slightly, but not enough to make a big difference. During the second study, he was monitored around the clock, and researchers placed cameras everywhere to make sure he wasn't sneaking samosas or something. But again, mans went 15 days without eating, drinking, pooping, or peeing, and all the tests came back normal. These studies have been dismissed by the larger scientific community. What the heck did those idiots know? Indrid Cold. Again, I talked about this dude on my cryptid Iceberg, so in the interest of saving myself some time, I'm just gonna replay that. Or hey, why don't you do yourself a favor, go watch the whole thing. It's only an hour and 14 minutes long. Indrid Cold is another being that, similar to Mothman, was seen around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Bro, seriously, what is it with West Virginia? Like, remind me to never go there. Anyways, Indrid Cold is known as the Smiling Man because he was described as having a permanent smile, along with the ability to communicate telepathically. Here's a sketch of what he supposedly looked like. This guy was kind of overshadowed by Mothman since both of them were around the same place at the same time, and Mothman was covered much more by the media. The most notable account of Cold was by a man named Woodrow Derenberger, who gave an entire 30-minute interview about his experience with him. Here's a little snippet.
What I saw last night, I know that I saw it. It was no figment of imagination. It was there, and I was there. And
now, you said that he also made the statement that we will see you again.
when he was getting ready to leave, he stepped back from the truck about one step. Then he said, Mr. Derenberger, we will see you again. He didn't say I, he said we.
Alright, let me give you a breakdown of the entire discussion. Woodrow claims that he witnessed an aircraft that was hovering about 12 inches off the road, and it suddenly pulled up in front of him, and a door opened to the craft, and then a being exited the ship. The vehicle then flew up 50 feet in the air, and the being walked up right next to Derenberger's truck window and told him to roll it down. Derenberger described the being as looking like an ordinary man, 6 feet tall, about 35 years old, and wearing a glossy metallic dark blue coat. My man's fashion was truly out of this world. The man spoke to Woodrow telepathically. His mouth did not move. Instead, he had a fixed smile on his face, and the man told him, "Roll down your window. I want to talk to you." During their discussion, the man called himself Indrid Cold. He told Woodrow that he meant him no harm. Derenberger went on to say, "I was very frightened, and as far as I can understand, this was all mental. There were no spoken words from him. I know what he was asking me, but yet he stood there and his mouth did not move. He had a smile on his face and he appeared very courteous and friendly." Dang man, tell that to the guy who drew these sketches. This motherfucker does not look courteous or friendly. Indrid Cold and Mr. Derenberger's conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Before returning to his flying craft, he said, "We will see you again." There were other sightings with various descriptions, but this was by far the most in-depth. The Mante tribe is a primitive and elusive tribe that supposedly lives deep in the jungles of Indonesia. Modern Indonesians believe that they are descended from this tribe and that it still exists, living like they used to live back in the day. Speculation that this tribe still exists was fueled by this video taken in Sumatra back in 2017. Alexander Solonik was a hitman for the Russian mafia in the 90s. He was a police officer for 6 months before getting fired. A few years later, he was charged for doing something that rhymes with drape and sentenced to 8 years in prison. The day before he was supposed to get locked up, he went on the run and was caught months later. While in prison, some of the inmates found out that he was a cop, so they marked him for death. He was attacked by 12 people but managed to defeat them all, and after that, nobody messed with him again. After 2 years in prison, he escaped again, went back home and joined the Russian mob as an assassin, and let me tell you, this guy was good. He was like the Russian John Wick. He assassinated multiple mob bosses, and according to stories, he shot a dude in a crowded nightclub while he was surrounded by security guards. By this point, he was a legend in the underworld, and law enforcement tried and failed to arrest him multiple times. On one occasion, he actually was arrested, but the police didn't search him well enough, so he shot multiple cops inside the police station before he ran off and finally got cornered and sent to prison again. But one thing you gotta know about our boy Alex, you can't keep him locked up for long, so he escaped with the help of a crooked corrections officer. After his second prison escape, he ran away to Greece where he eventually started his own organized crime ring. He had around 50 men under his command who specialized in drug smuggling and contract whackings. While he was in Greece, he was stupid rich and bought several villas in Athens. After a while of being on top, Solonik was whacked by another Russian hitman also named Alexander inside one of his villas in 1977. Edward Mordrake was a man born in the 19th century who apparently had a face on the back of his head. According to stories, the face would whisper, grab objects, and even laugh. Mordrake begged doctors to remove it because it was driving him mad. Sadly, at the age of 23, Mordrake would unalive himself. The first known description of Mordrake was written in an 1895 Boston Post article by fiction author Charles Hildreth. Really, a fiction author? Next! The Queen of Sheba is a woman mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. She brought a caravan of valuable gifts from her homeworld homeland, to King Solomon of Israel. Now, King Solomon was known to be the wisest man alive, so when the queen arrived, naturally she tested his knowledge with questions and riddles. Now, scholars aren't exactly sure where Sheba is, but it's generally thought that it's either in Arabia or Ethiopia. Different cultures have completely different stories about who she was. In Arabic tradition, she was from the kingdom of Saba in modern-day Yemen. In Ethiopia, however, the Queen of Sheba is a huge part of their culture. According to them, the Queen of Sheba became pregnant by Solomon and gave birth to a son named Menelik. Menelik one day traveled to Israel to meet his father Solomon, and when he returned to Ethiopia, he brought the Ark of the Covenant back with him. They believe the Ark is in Ethiopia to this very day, and Menelik was the first ruler in a dynasty that lasted up until the 20th century. King Koloksai. The Scythians were a group of ancient tribes who inhabited most of Central Asia. It's thought that King Koloksai united the tribes and founded a dynasty that lasted around 200 years. And apparently he smoked weed, man, ganja, grass, pot. Seriously, I found this article on wayofleaf.com alleging that the Scythians smoked that dank kush. But you can't believe anything stoners say, man. Anyway, King Koloksai, truly mysterious because I could barely find any information on him. Adam Rayner was the only person in all of recorded history to be both a dwarf and a giant. At the age of 18, he measured in at 4 feet tall, legally a dwarf. By the time he was in his 30s, he reached a height of 7'2". So how did this man go from sitting in a high chair to playing center for the Knicks? Well, it was due to a tumor in his pituitary gland, which is the most common cause of gigantism. It's just weird that it happened so late in life. Sergei Tretyakov was a Russian intelligence officer who defected to the United States in 2000. Sergei was a KGB spy posing as a UN diplomat in New York. But no, he wasn't, because he was a double agent passing secrets from the Kremlin to Washington. Tretyakov, you sly son of a gun. He defected to the United States in 2000 after the passing of his mother. He waited for that because now the Russians couldn't use her to bring him back. After his defection, the CIA gave him a new name and settled him in an unknown location with his family. Oh, and they gave him $2 million. That's pretty cool. But then in 2008, he started doing interviews for an upcoming book he had coming out about his life titled Comrade J, The Untold Secrets of Russia's master spy in America after the end of the Cold War. Okay, first of all, that title's way too fucking long, and second of all, my hat keeps riding up my head. Anyways, this book spilled all sorts of tea about the KGB, including the mass disinformation and propaganda campaigns they would run. And this was all the way back in 2008. And sadly, Sergei would pass away 2 years after his book dropped. The timing of his passing was suspicious, and some people suggest that foul play was involved. Well guys, if you stuck around this far, I thank you. That was the Mysterious and Enigmatic People Iceberg. As always, let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Oh, and also, I'm on social media, you know? I'm on Twitter. I sometimes tweet funny stuff, and I even have a Discord that's not half bad, so consider following me on other forms of social media. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Later.